Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about running teams. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what are some tips for efficiently managing a software development team? Well, this is a very big topic. I would say that I usually have like this takes a bit of like it takes a lot of experience to do this well, I would say, and it takes skills that I don't see the average tech lead have because it's this is one of those arguments that it's sort of true and it's sort of not, where some people will tell you that, oh, you don't have to be an expert in the thing that you are a leader of in order to be an efficient leader. And I usually say that that's the argument of someone who's incompetent in an area, because leadership is such a intangible thing. What are you actually doing? But there is a grain of truth to this, because at the same time it's true that you can't just address, which is the case for a lot of people, you can't address the leadership of a software team as just a software developer. Because if managing a software development team, I argue, is one part understanding the process of delivery and the way that the software developers behave and sort of how they do their work, where their strengths and their weaknesses are. Uh, but it's also a technical question where you need to understand sort of how this overall system is designed so that you can set up a work process and a collaboration between the team members that actually bridges a lot of those sorts of issues. So what I usually do, or the tips that I usually give people when it comes to managing a team, is that first and foremost, you have to create a work structure that creates consistent results, or where it's fairly easy for you to track how everything's going. So I usually tell people who are new tech leads or leaders of a team that you focus on one thing and one thing only, and that is to for you when in the beginning of things, learn how to answer this one question: when is it done? That's the only question you should know the answer to at all times, because as the leader of a team, that is the only is the most common question you're ever going to get. But it's also a very complicated one, because if you don't really know your people, you don't really know the state of the code, you don't really know anything like that, then you have to do what most product managers and people like who doesn't actually know anything what they do. They defer to the most senior experience in the team, or they defer to asking the team and things like that. And that makes things a lot more complicated, and it indicates that you don't really know roughly how well your team is performing. So what I usually do to tell people is that start with a very easy lean process and start making sure that you have a communicative environment between the people working. In other words, you do the stand-up, you have the retro, you have like sessions of grooming and things like that where you prepare work and so forth, and then you set a work cadence. Usually I use a Kanban board or something like that, where usually I tell people that we don't have to do Scrum or anything like that, but I expect you all to follow everybody's expected to follow certain work practices, such as, for example, you don't just add ad hoc stories and like start working on willy-nilly things. You create a story card for the things. You make sure that, when we have our grooming sessions, we basically prepare packages of work. It might be like a specific epic, or it might just be a story or something like that, but we are all informed of roughly what everybody's working on and how things are going. And then we have some type of Kanban board where you can see how things are progressing. We can track each morning. We can say things. I can go story by story, which is a tip that I usually give people. Don't just ask people what they're doing. Go story by story and ask them, how are things going on this one? Do you need any help or something like that? Because in a team that doesn't communicate all that well, it's very important that you breed in organically people supporting and helping each other. And a classic one is that in a non-communicative team where people sort of just working they work by themselves, they don't actually consider helping each other. And the most common bottlenecking process, at the very least at the team level, is that people don't help each other with code reviews, they don't help each other with testing or things like that. They're basically lacking support, and you have to breathe that into the environment so that that becomes an organic thing. And that's actually very easy if you just do the things card by card, because if you always ask how are things going and do you all need any help with the thing that they are working on, then you trigger a communication situation where someone needs to express if they need help or something like that, and that triggers others to help out, which will probably not happen if they just speak roughly what they're going to do. Uh, Basically, you sort of force the question, do you want help, yes or no, to make it natural for people to ask for help. And by just doing these basic things, this is not full agile or something like that, you can call it lean if you want to, you start getting some resemblance of a predictable result, because now you know what everybody's working on, everybody else knows if somebody else needs help. You know that, like the people working, I usually also have like a rule where I say work right to left, top down, basically saying that the closer you get to the done column on a Kanban board, the more prioritized it is. So you don't just go and do your own thing when somebody else needs help, or there's some handoff situation like testing or like a code review or something like that. And top down basically means that you work on the thing that is highest priority in the work queue, in the backlog, at all times. This gives you a predictable result, and then you watch out and you sort of groom that into the team that, you know, it's fine to come with suggestions, it's fine to like have all these like things that you want to do, but you don't just go and like do things. You communicate to the team and usually through a story card, because the Kanban board is a very efficient way for you to track the state of everything. And when you have that part in place, plus the technical skills where you actually know how the code works and like how the development process actually works, you get really good very quickly at answering that question, when is it done, or sort of knowing how difficult something is or things like that, which is, as I said, it's the main question everybody's going to have for you. This will give you, I would say, at least 50%, if you do these things, 50% of an efficient management structure for your team. Then comes like the more, like and we don't have time to go through all of it, but then after that it basically comes down to understanding how to structure work processes, how do you set up like the necessary tooling that the team needs, how do you set up like a functioning CI pipeline, so that you know that you get not just consistent, that you don't get just measurable results, but you get consistent quality. That's the technical part of it. The soft skills is, as I said, that's sort of these basic tips will give you most of that. Everything else is sort of down to you, because some people make good leaders and some people don't make good leaders. But if you can do this first part pretty well, and if you have the experience to know how to do, like as I was saying, CI pipelines, setting up like the necessary quality checks, setting up the right, because in many cases, guys, some software teams, they have senior software developers, but they may not really know how to structure an organized delivery process. So even if the team is communicating and like you have all these social aspects in place, that's sort of the management part. But if you really want to kick it up a notch, sometimes you, as I said, I will say almost always, it's required that you have someone with technical knowledge that doesn't just look at the soft parts of managing a team, but also the technical parts, because managing, or leading as I like to call it, is about actually understanding the people that you're dealing with, because otherwise you can only manage them, because you can't really see whether or not there's some systematic problem in the development process, which is very common, guys. Even for senior software developers, I meet tons of seniors who, you know, they're really good at, say, the coding, but they don't really do all that well with managing DevOps, or like they don't really do really well with collaboration or creating tests or things like that. So because everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses, and that's sort of, I argue, that's the other part that is very important if you want to manage a team efficiently. So what I want you to take away from this is that my favorite tips for managing a software team is that you basically have to create a work process that gives you consistent, like a good overview of how things are going at any given time. A structured work process. I like to use the analogy. You imagine that you're building a factory. You're designing a factory that is supposed to streamline a certain process in some fashion, and in order for you to do that, you need to have certain machines or certain like tools or certain practices within the workspace that everybody follows, because that gives you a reproducible and consistent way of measuring how things are going. And I'm not saying that you measure like with metrics necessarily. I'm saying that if you have a stand-up, you get communication, basic communication going with the team. If they trust you and they know that you're going to listen to them and so forth and so forth, you check in on every story, that you make sure that, you know, you check if it's going well. If it's not going well, then do they need any help, and you promote that they should, you know, try to get some help from their coworkers. And you know that you prepare stories as a team. You make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to know, like the shared responsibilities of the team. And you do that, plus have a fairly good understanding of the state of the code and sort of where like things are with each individual software developer, like what they do well, what they don't do so well. Usually you get really good, as I said, at the most fundamental question anybody who's a manager has to be able to answer, which is, what's the state of things? How fast are you done? Like, when are you going to be done? Etc, etc. This is what everybody wants to know all the time. And to efficiently answer that question, you need these things in place, because this is the way that you sort of have your finger on the pulse of the overall process of the team. So if you get that in place, I mean, guys, even a junior level software developer can do this. It's 50% that, like, if not 80% of what you will need in order to efficiently manage the team. Then the rest of it is down to your ability as a leader and building trust and your social skills and so forth, and the technical skills. Never underestimate the value of having technical leadership in a software development team, because, as I said, guys, managing is one thing. You will get most of it from doing the things that I just talked about, because you need, apart from of course reaching out to stakeholders and so forth. But if you want to lead and really make the team efficient, you can't just set up the work structure and do that. You also have to understand if the people, like, how do you coach the software developers into a workflow that is really, really well suited for your specific application. Have a great day.